But there's this concept that I just love that comes from J.R.R. Tolkien. Basically, the concept is that as people who are created in the image of a creator, then we're designed to create alongside him. He would say that a good story gives you the capacity to be able to co-create alongside the story. Welcome to the Rooted Minds podcast, where we come together as a family to explore literature and come together to sort of learn more about ourselves and our emotions and talk about a lot of fun things. Today, I'm going to be leading us, and we're going to be talking about the imagination, because the imagination is such a divine gift.
Yes.
To be creatures who can like picture things in our head and hear things in our head and touch things in our head. It's kind of a wild like thing when you think about it. Really. But books in particular are something that really exercise that muscle of imagination, because imagination is sort of like a muscle. Like in a sense, you kind of got to train it, you got to use it, you know?
Yeah.
And so books are our way to be able to sort of unlock the potential that we have in our minds to create and explore these elaborate and beautiful worlds. And so I'm excited to talk about this with you guys.
Yes.
So one thing that I just wanted to start with talking about is just like, what is like one book that sort of like sparks your imagination in this way, where you feel like you're just like seeing it in your head and you felt like, I don't know, that you've kind of like explored this world?
Out of the Silent Planet.
Oh, C.S. Lewis, yeah.
That's such a good one. Just like such a fantastical space.
It's so bizarre.
I was always just like so engaged to imagine that
what
world.
Does that even look like?
What does it look like? I even drew pictures of like what
That's
I thought
so
it looked like to like, what does this creature look like, or what does this landscape look like?
Yeah.
It's like all pink. Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's like this sort of topic and like what you're saying is like why people are like sometimes are disappointed in the movies, because they're like, oh, it didn't it didn't look like the way I imagined it, or that character.
That's exactly
was...
what I was thinking. It's like the first time I saw The Fellowship of the Ring. I was like, orcs did not look like that in my mind, and they were scary. And it was like somebody else's imagination of them were like way too far for me. Like the books were just so good because they were, I don't know if my imagination had like a limiter on. I mean, the thing was scary, but it was not gross. Also,
like gruesome.
Gruesome, yeah.
Which is super interesting because it's like the way our imagination is designed is sort of like designed to like work with us and not against us. Like the original version of our imagination, you know, is designed to like sort of give us this like protective shield almost in some areas to guard us against things that might be too scary, you know?
Yeah, I have to really be careful with what kinds of things, because I have a very active imagination. Yeah. And if anything's too scary, it just gets in there and then takes up too much space.
Yeah.
I don't want to be imagining those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one book that came to my mind was this book called A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. It's just this guy that's been put in the Russian gulag. Yeah, and the whole book is just one day. It's all one day, and so he was very detailed about what you're seeing and smelling and feeling and doing and all of this.
Such a rough
and it was really rough. Of course, I've never even been to Russia, you know, so it's like, whoa, this to deal with something like that is intense, but it just got my imagination going. That must have been like.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. Like I love like writing stories as well, and so I feel like when I'm like reading stories and I'm imagining stuff, I'm always like trying to like pick and see like how is this author like expressing this or creating this, and a lot of times it's really crazy how like just a few details can create a whole landscape for you in your head. Like they don't have to, you know, like this sort of book that you're talking about. I'm forgetting the name already.
The Day in the Life.
Yeah, Day in the Life. There you go.
We'll go with that.
But, you know, he's like describing like so detailed and vivid, and so you see like exactly what he's seeing, which is like one really interesting way of like writing a story. And then there's like other books that give you like one little detail and your mind is like, whoop, here's the whole place.
Yeah,
Which feels like Out of the Silent Planet, because there's so much more that he could describe about this alien world that he's in, you know?
Right.
Or the alien characters that he's encountering.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I remember with that book specifically, like I've talked to like different people and like talked about like how you imagine those like creatures, and I'm like, that is not how I imagined it.
Right.
It's so interesting. Did you have a book, Audrey?
I was thinking about it, and I feel like I don't know. I think
somebody to choose from.
I know, there's so many books. There's just so many books. I think the one I was really thinking about that always like makes my mind like, oh, you know, is just like The Big Friendly Giant. It's again by Ronald Dahl. I loved his books, so I read all of them. But Ronald Dahl, the BFG, The Big Friendly Giant. I think there's just, I mean, and I know we both picked like a fantastical, like,
that's
but
fun.
I feel like there's different like veins of imagination and what that is, of like things that aren't real and things that are real that you can imagine.
I also thought of the Boxcar Children.
Oh yeah,
which is not like, it's a fiction story, but it's not in a fantastical world.
Right.
But I loved that book so much. I could picture like where the little bed was made of sticks, and where their shelf was with all of their cups they found from the trash dump, and this is what the little creek looked outside with the rock, and their milk
they set up their little kitchen.
Yes, like all of that just made me like want to go into my backyard and build a place to live. So I had a very clear picture of what that looked like.
That's funny.
So
That's amazing.
I could do it.
You did do it.
I did do it.
Built a little clubhouse.
I did.
She did.
But thankfully she didn't move in.
I didn't move in.
No, true. But like this, what you're saying about how like you created this world in your mind and it inspired you and made you like want to do things like in the real world, you know, and how you feel like, I'm sure like as you're talking about this, like you feel like you could just walk right back into the same imagined space that the Boxcar Children live in, which is probably different than how I imagined it, you know. But there's this concept that I just love that comes from J.R.R. Tolkien, of course. But he has this concept that he calls subcreation, and he's like written all sorts of stuff about it. I'll put a link in the description notes about it. But basically the concept is that as people who are created in the image of a creator, then we're designed to create alongside him. And for Tolkien, the way that was expressed was through books. And so he would say that a good story gives you the capacity to be able to co-create alongside the story. And so it like makes space for you to be able to like imagine that world, and doesn't like override you, but it allows you to create as well. And since we have these like imaginations that are just so powerful in their capacity and what they're able to do, you know, we have this ability to be able to come into, you know, this pieces of paper and ink typed out words, you know, see words, and be able to like create something out of that in our brains, which I think is so beautiful.
So like the author not giving you every little detail and allowing you to fill in some of those details.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah. And even like with your book that you mentioned, like A Day in the Life, where he's like extra detailed, like I've read plenty of books like that too.
Right.
There's still so much like space that they leave. And in those cases, I feel like they want to give you more space for like imagining the emotional pathway that's happening, especially like since you said the whole book was one day.
Book,
that's crazy. Yeah.
Early morning,
we might be siblings.
Wow.
And just as you were talking, I was just thinking about Jesus and his parables. Like, tell us that story about like the flowers on the hillside.
So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Israel, which was such an amazing experience. 10 out of 10 would recommend. But it really transformed my view on like scripture and just like how I read it, because one of those things was that Jesus, as you know, he's a storyteller. Is, you know, everything that you find in the Gospels is just Jesus telling more stories and stories and stories to people. But the cool thing is that when Jesus was telling these stories, he would purposefully use the environment around him to connect with his audience as he was telling the story. And so I had the opportunity to go all the way up on to the place where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, which is insane. And it's like this big cliffside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and it's so beautiful. There's greenery everywhere. It's amazing.
Wow.
But the cool thing is, like, when you're up there on that hill, then you look around and you see like all the like images that Jesus used in his story, and like when he's talking about on the Sermon on the Mount. And one in particular that was like, you know, like the flowers and the birds and all those things. One in particular that I felt was like really impactful to me was just even like recognizing like locationally that you could see across the Sea of Galilee to all the little towns across, you know, on the other side. And in his sermon, he talks about a city on a hill cannot be hidden. And so he's standing there on this big cliffside that's overlooking all of these towns where all the people have just come from where they live, you know, and it goes up on a hill. So there's like the Sea of Galilee, and then it comes up like this, and all the towns are dotted across there, and all their lights are shining through, you know. And so the people, as they're listening to him say this, would have been looking at him and just past him to see all the cities, you know, that you can't hide because you're on a hill, their lights are shining, you know. So that's just one really beautiful element of like Jesus was giving the people that he's speaking to, who, you know, there's nothing like crazy special about like any one in particular. They're all pretty average people, as we all are, you know. But he recognizes their capacity to imagine and co-create alongside him as he tells the story. And he does it really well in giving the space for that, because he, you know, connects with them using the things that they know how to imagine really, really well.
Yeah, and
by using
adds,
stuff
sort
they
of
can
like
see.
adds to it and gives it deeper and more broad meaning.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's just really cool. So this concept of like subcreation and co-creating alongside, it brings up this like really interesting point in such a digital age, because there's this concept of like passive and active reading. Like when you know, watch a movie or something like that, then your imagination can be like inspired, but it's you know, it's limited in a way, because, you know, exactly the way the character looks is imagined for you, and like you said, the orcs are imagined for you,
Right?
and all that sort of thing. So
almost like whenever you get like the book that has the movie picture on the cover, that feels like, okay, now I can only ever picture this character like that actor,
like the movie did.
Exactly.
and sometimes it doesn't connect in my head.
So
Cover it up.
what do you guys think is like the difference between like passive and active reading, and like why is active reading important?
What would you say passive reading would be?
Passive reading is like allowing something else to imagine for you, versus like when you're like actively reading in a book, like you're creating the world in your head, versus like you could still be passive reading in a book by just like reading the words and not like trying to engage with it. You know, like I don't know if you guys have ever had that moment where you've like read 3 pages and then you realize you've read 3 pages, but you can't tell anyone anything that you've just read.
Yeah.
I think it's like I used to just read to answer questions for a test.
Yeah,
like
a
I knew the
textbook.
characters, I knew the little kind of the details maybe, but I was not like walking through their world with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Feels like maybe a difference.
Yeah. Much more passive.
That's what I was going to say too. It's just sort of like for information, I guess you could say, like just reading the words to get some sort of information.
Like a consumption, kind of.
Yeah, like a instead of like engaging and immersing yourself into the characters and experiencing with them, and that's a different mindset.
Yeah, it is. And you know, like we said, like active reading is not limited to like fantasy novels or something that has something like really wild and crazy, but it can be just like someone's life, you know, just what's happening. And we've talked about like in previous episodes about like how reading across different cultures and genres can really like expand your empathy.
Right.
And so I think it takes like a little bit of this imagination workout to like be able to exercise and get to the point where you're able to like really like grasp like what's going on with this character.
It's
to start relating with them.
I remember when I was younger, when illustrators would like draw faces in the books, like for like chapter books of some sort, I would get really frustrated because it felt like not even like in the movie, but it would like mess with my picture. Or sometimes if they even said like, this is the color eyes they have, or this is the color of hair that they have.
Yeah.
Like I would be like, you're wrong. Like this is wrong. I remember like even pausing in a book, just like closing my eyes. What I need to have like my clear picture. Sometimes I even would like try to find a Pinterest version, like a photo of somebody, so I could just like have my clear visual of what this person looks like to me.
Yeah.
That's so real.
It's a really interesting point because with this practice and exercising our creative muscle and imaginative muscle, like it is something to exercise. And it's interesting how when you, it's one of the benefits of reading classics, right? Because they're are written in such a way that it makes it kind of, it's easier at least to imagine with them and co-create like you're talking about. But other books that you might read, you might have a harder time because they're not written quite in the way that helps you, kind of gives you the leg up. You know, it didn't give you quite enough to spark that. But if you've been practicing, if you've been exercising your muscle,
that's so
then
true.
you can go to books that are maybe a little bit more challenging to read.
Right.
And be able to imagine with it and track with it in different ways.
That's so true.
Really quick, it's interesting, like, related to what you were saying, too, of, like, you just, like, being frustrated by the pictures, because, like, for me, it's interesting, because I was thinking about, like, my personal experience, because for me, like, growing up reading was really hard, and so, like, for me, I would love finding books. I was like, praise God it has pictures. Because I'm like, I think because reading was so hard, it was almost like my brain didn't have space to even imagine because I was working so hard reading. Just doing the actual action of reading was like all my brain could handle.
Translating the words was so much that translating the ideas into images, you didn't have space for that.
Exactly. Until later when I actually like found a joy of reading and like grew my ability to read well.
Also why audiobooks were so helpful.
Exactly, because I could actually have space to imagine.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I think it took out the aspect of having the comprehension of reading and the speed and the slow and even like trying to get to the next line instead of like jumping, it was all hard. So
I can imagine like if you're reading it slower, it can make it harder to feel immersed into the story.
For sure, because it's like
I didn't even understand what that sentence said.
Exactly.
I can't imagine it.
Let alone the whole book, you know? So I think there's a very real aspect of like finding what works for you and like learning your own self of like how do I work and how can I grow my personal imagination.
And in a way, like being sensitive to your own weaknesses, like for you, like if I'm like in your past listening to audiobooks or finding books with pictures.
Yeah. Or like for me, like I mean, in relation to books, like I was around a lot of people who did this very well. But also just like for me, because I didn't have this outlet of books, I played a lot of games that were like, let's imagine, you know, like all of the games I played were like,
that's true.
And now I have superpowers, you know? It's like those are all the games that I played. It's like growing my imagination.
I see.
So you were exercising your imagination muscles in other ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's like such a good point because like practically for like being able to like grow, you know, your ability to imagine, there's like so many different ways that you can do it. And one of those ways really is just to create. And I think there's like a lot of us are like really like, or I can be at least, I can be like really worried about like daydreaming too much or just like getting in my head and like I want to stay present. Like that's so true. But there's also an element of like, as Tolkien says, like we connect with our creator through creating and imagination is part of that. And so like if you're just like, as a kid, like playing outside and imagining, you're not wasting your time.
Yeah.
Like you are connecting with your creator because you're creating. And so I think that's like a beautiful way to.
That's such a good word.
That's so good.
So hard as a mom sometimes to feel like you're doing enough for your kid, especially your kids that are struggling reading.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's so many great things from books, but I can't get them there.
Yeah.
Because there's just a gap in the skill level.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, having time to play outside and build those creative muscles is just so valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's different kinds of imagination, right? When you're outside, you're imagining how to get this stick to lean on that stick so that it'll hold up the other stick, And it's like problem solving, kind of.
Innovative
Innovation, yeah.
Exactly.
There are different kinds,
So we can work our brains with imagination. It's a valuable skill to cultivate and to work out. And the more you do it, the stronger it gets. So thank you guys for talking today, and thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again for joining us on the Rooted Minds podcast. We're all really passionate about the ways that stories can shape our lives through our imagination. So what are your thoughts? Do you have a book that really captured your imagination? Comment your thoughts below. Until next time, may you find joy, grace, and peace in the pages you turn.